Hi, I'm Dakin Matthews, and this is Sheltering with Shakespeare. Okay, here's another sonnet, one you don't hear very often. It's number 63. So if you want to get your book out, you can pause now, and I'll be here when you get back. Okay, this is not a hard sonnet, or frankly, even a great sonnet, though it's well worth exploring. Here it is. Against my love shall be as I am now, with time's injurious hand crushed and o'erworn, when hours have drained his blood and filled his brow with lines and wrinkles, when his youthful morn hath travelled on to age's steepy night, and all those beauties whereof now he's king are vanishing or vanished out of sight, stealing away the treasure of his spring. For such a time do I now fortify against confounding age's cruel knife, that he shall never cut from memory my sweet love's beauty, though my lover's life. His beauty shall in these black lines be seen, and they shall live, and he in them, still green. Okay, let's start with the form. Sonnet form is rigorous, as we noted before, in its stanzaic rhyme scheme, and nearly dictates the rhetorical structure of the argument as well. In this case, there is a little manipulation, but no strong violation of form, as, say, there was in Sonnet 104, where the stanzas and the sentences simply did not mesh. So it's also a good example of the 8-4-2 structure instead of the 4-4-4-2 or the 8-6 structure. The first 8 lines, the octet, express one theme. And then after line 9, sometimes called the turn, the next 4, a quatrain, have another theme, and the final 2, the couplet, have a final theme. 8 lines of when a certain bad time comes, 4 lines of I will have avoided the bad effects of that, and 2 lines of by doing this. Now, in form, the poet specifically honors the initial octave as opposed to separating it into 2 quatrains by making both line 3 and line 4 run-on lines, that is, lines whose syntax forces you to keep going past the end line, so that while the rhyme scheme would suggest a break after line 4, the meaning and the momentum ride right through the break and make the first quatrain flow seamlessly into the second to create the octet. Now, let's look at the word use. We have some interesting choices here. The very first word, against, is used in a way we rarely use it today. Its general meaning here is in anticipation of, or in preparation for. But it has a much stronger specific connotation, in anticipation of something bad, to prepare myself to fight against something. So there's a stronger anticipation of the keyword in line 9 at the turn, fortify, literally build a fortification to defend against something. And the very next word, against, really does mean opposed to, echoing the first word of the sonnet and specifying it. But back to the first line again. Love is, of course, the person, not the feeling. The first line also establishes the age difference between the poet and his beloved, and therefore the description that follows is not just of the imagined youth when he gets older, but more immediately of the poet himself as he is now. It is self-deprecating, in fact. A crushed and o'erworn in line 2 may be a bit more metaphorical than we initially think. Perhaps the poet is looking at his own face and seeing it as a fabric, literally wrinkled and being crushed and worn too often. The draining of the blood in line 3 sounds a little vampiric, but it probably means no more than the paleness of the older face due to the thinning of the blood in old age. Now, also in line 3, the quarto spells the word filed, not filled. And perhaps the modern tendency to amend this to filled weakens the strength of the description by substituting a generic word, filled, for a powerfully metaphoric one, filed. There's a strange word in line 5, steepy, and lots of explications have been offered in its defense. The steep decline into old age, or even the more liquid meaning, like the setting sun dipping into the ocean and being extinguished there. Well, call me simplistic, but I suspect it's just a misprint for sleepy. The printer grabbed the ST ligature instead of the SL ligature out of the type case. A ligature, by the way, is a single piece of type containing 2 connected letters. Youthful morn and sleepy night do make a pretty irresistible pairing. So why do most editors stay with the hard quarto reading of steepy? Well, they do so based on the principle called Lectio Difficilior, the harder reading. When faced with 2 readings, an emendation that makes excellent sense, and an original reading that doesn't, sometimes you choose the one that doesn't, because the easier one is also easier to explain, while the hard one has no easy reason to justify its being there except it must have been in the original. After all, who would ever correct sleepy to steepy? So steepy must be right, they say. Well, I don't agree. The next 3 lines about the youth being the king of his beauties, if read closely, makes time not only a destroyer of the youth's beauty, but a thief and a traitor as well, robbing the king's treasury. In line 9, as would be typical of a turn, there's a repeat of some of the very first line, for such a time. In line 10, confounding means more than destruction. It also means overthrow, continuing some of the treason suggestions in the octet. And the knife and the cut in the next 2 lines call back with sharper vengeance the injuries the youth suffers in the octet. Death and age normally carry a scythe. The pairing of beauty and black in line 13 is a traditional opposition. And the use of the word lines there, now with a whole new meaning, is an echo of the 4th line and a corrective to it. And green, of course, means still young, still alive, still spring-like. Shakespeare used it in Sonnet 104, remember, which yet are green. So much for the vocabulary. Now, there are a couple of grammatical tangles we might want to unknot. The last 4 lines, for example, can seem ambiguous or even elliptical. That is, the syntax may depend heavily upon words that are left out, which modern grammarians might prefer were present. The he in line 11, for example, refers to time, not to the youth. The verb cut actually governs the end of line 12 as well. It takes a compound object, grammarians would say. Time's knife will not cut his beauty from memory, meaning not just the poet's memory, but the world's, though it may cut his life. Similarly, in the last line, they refers to the black lines, that is, the verses of the poem, which will still live, and in them the beloved will still live green. Now, while the sonnet itself is not one of Shakespeare's gems, it is interesting in that we see and hear him reworking the same thing, same themes over and over, like his age and the youth's beauty, like the ravages of time, like his own unworthiness, like the power of poetry to preserve beauty, trying to find the best expression. It's like we're in the workshop of a careful artist and are observing his sketches and studies, leading to the occasional masterwork. And so we can see this sonnet not just as an individual piece or even as part of an overarching narrative, but also as part of the creative process itself. Seeing a minor work may increase our admiration for the major work and help us to understand how the masterpiece came to be. And if we're really observant, we might notice that Shakespeare used the exact same opening words in another sonnet, number 49, when the lines in the beloved's face signal not age, but displeasure, and the poet's self-deprecation and unworthiness come to the forefront. I'm Dakin Matthews, sheltering with Shakespeare.